In the first session, we explored what hermeneutics actually is. We now move to the question, why is hermeneutics important in any case? And that will prepare the ground for us to look at the hermeneutical nature of biblical texts. The focus of this session is the consequences of interpretation. And the question is, does interpretation really matter? Now, I can remind you of the Greek philosophers' distinction between those things that are important and what they call adiaphora, things that are really neither here nor there, whether you like blue or green. And whether you are a morning person or an evening person, that really does not matter in the bigger scheme of things. But there's also an attempt by Epictetus, a very famous slave philosopher of the time, and said, you must distinguish between those things, ephumen, that we have control over, and those that are ephumen, those things that we don't have control over. And that is really the principle of wisdom. So worry about those things that you can control and forget about the rest. There's a beautiful story that a Roman soldier grabbed his foot at one stage and started twisting it. And then Epictetus said to him, if you twist it further, you're going to break my leg. And the soldier did that and broke his leg. But Epictetus was totally unmoved by the process because he said, I have no control over the actions of the soldier. Now, this sounds very much like the modern distinction between internal control and external control of pools of control. And maybe this was anticipated. But although it could be helpful in many practical cases, this is really not enough. We are also not asking the question here, what interpretation is right or wrong at this stage? We'll come to that later. The question is, are there issues and circumstances and events where interpretation is of critical importance? Now, I don't think it is difficult to find dramatic examples. If you've been bitten by a snake, it is really a matter of life and death to determine what kind of snake bit you, because that will determine what antidote you're going to use. It is also not very difficult to take the dramatic example of a court case where the decision of the judge eventually could also mean an issue between life or death, or will alter the course of the individual's life forever. When considering the consequences of interpretation, I think you should also be forewarned that you're going to lose what Ricoeur calls your first naivete, and we'll explain that concept a little bit later. But you will develop a double view of things, not only observing the process, but what happens in this process. And this will make you aware that interpretation is not a matter of innocence, but sometimes with grave consequences. Now, there is a saying that says, noblesse oblige. If you belong to the nobility, then you have certain obligations that go with you. And that means once you have developed an insight and understanding of a matter or a reality, that brings with it, that insight brings with it certain obligations. And in practical terms, It means that you are developing a new understanding, a new self-understanding in the process. And that is the question of consequences. You have to act in terms of that new self-understanding. This is a critical point because interpretation and understanding has certain practical but also existential consequences. Once we understand and we have insight, we have the obligation to act in terms of that. I can't stress the importance of this enough. Now, a practical example is the transition South Africa went through in the late 90s. The change from an exclusive democracy to an inclusive one, where everybody's rights were respected and guaranteed in the Constitution, did not happen overnight. It was a move from a certain interpretation of reality, a certain understanding of how the community should be organized, and the implication and application of that understanding and a form of a divided state based on categories of racial discrimination. And that was the outcome of that interpretation. That was the reality that resulted from this interpretation. That was changed only because there was an alternative view, a view of a society that is inclusive, where everybody has the same rights on the equal footing, and these rights and privileges being guaranteed by the Constitution. So there was an alternative set of interpretation, an alternative view of reality, and an alternative way in which the society can be organized. And that hermeneutical process of an alternative option for society set in motion in many levels and in many ways this alternative reality in which the country changed. So this is why interpretation really does matter, because in the end it changes reality. And changes in reality is only possible if there is a prior understanding of an alternative way to organize and to create this new society. The alternative reality we are talking about is documented in documents like the Constitution, in the option for inclusive democracy, in the Freedom Charter. There it is a sort of a residue of this process of seeking an alternative way to understand reality and to organize society. Now, at this stage, we are touching on one of the extremely important aspects of hermeneutics. And that is that it deals with a future possibility, with what Ricoeur calls the proposed world of the text, the world in front of the text. This is what lies behind what we will be talking about in one of the later sessions, the future-orientated nature of memory, of history. And finally, the priority of the possible over what is real. It means that hermeneutics are dealing with the priority of what is possible, not only with what is real. And this has not only concrete consequences, but it has existential meaning, meaning that it affects our own lives and how we live that. We shall follow these concepts in more detail in the further sessions.